So, as we were talking in the earlier lesson about various climate non-fiction books and the impact they have on public policy and public opinion and government policies. So, here is another book, The Sixth Extinction and Unnatural History by Elizabeth Kolbert, 2014. Elizabeth Kolbert's The Sixth Extinction explores the current mass extinction event driven by human activity. So, she bases her work on actualities, on facts, and how mass extinction of a species has been driven by human activity. In fact, all the writers, they keep in mind the scientific facts even when they discuss different philosophical points of view. So, when we think about this species extinction, then one can see how massive the scale of climate change is, and the geological age, when the dinosaurs became extinct, the intensity of the climate change then has been considered by scientists to be the same it is today. So, she is right to talk about this mass extinction driven by human activity. She draws on a wide range of scientific research, and she documents how species around the world are rapidly disappearing due to habitat destruction, pollution, climate change, and other human induced factors. So, she talks about the extinction of species, and in fact other climate non-fiction writers talk about even the word species that has been created by the capitalist system to mean animals, but the writers say it's just not animals who are species. All who live on earth are species. So, human beings are also a part of the species that face the danger of extinction along with other forms of life on the earth. Kolbert weaves together historical accounts, scientific findings, and personal observations to paint a harrowing picture of biodiversity crisis. So, there are numerous books that talk about the loss of biodiversity, and she too talks about historical accounts, scientific findings, and personal observations about biodiversity loss. She argues that human beings have become a geological force capable of altering the planet's ecosystems, and she examines the long-term consequences of this unprecedented extinction events. So, to say that humans have become the agent of change is a very philosophical question, because there was a time when nature itself was an agent of change and human beings were at its mercy. So, primitive man was at the mercy of the earth and its climate, which could change according to its own patterns. But today man has become an agent of climate change, and in a way that he can alter the climate so irreversibly that the entire living beings on the earth can be wiped out. So, she talks about the planet's ecosystems and how these human beings have become a geological force in themselves that are altering the ecosystems of the world, and she goes into the long term consequences of this extinction. So there's another book here, The Uninhabitable Earth, Life After Warming by David Wallace Wells, 2019. So we can see this is all contemporary non-fiction. David Wallace Wells' book offers a stark and terrifying vision of the future if climate change continues unchecked. The Uninhabitable Earth, Wallace Wells explores the worst case scenarios for global warming, from rising sea levels and extreme weather events to food shortages and mass migrations. So all the negative outcomes of climate change of the earth which becomes uninhabitable, those are mentioned in his book. The book serves as a wake-up call and is a meditation on humanity's responsibility. So we can see much of the climate non-fiction talks about approaching consequences, approaching disaster, and gives a warning to take measures to avert the coming crisis, which is growing worse and worse. How to avoid a climate disaster, the solutions we have and the breakthroughs we need, by Bill Gates. So Bill Gates himself, an industrialist, a millionaire, wrote this book in 2021 along with his wife, and in this book he presents a comprehensive roadmap for addressing climate change. He believes that technology can help in averting climate disasters. Drawing on his background in technology and philanthropy, Gates outlines a range of solutions for reducing greenhouse gas emissions, focusing on innovations in clean energy, transportation and agriculture. So he takes the help of technology and innovations to assist in creating clean energy, transportation and agriculture. So though he belongs to the side of the businessman and the industrialist, yet he has made some points about the aversion of climate disaster and climate change through technology itself. He emphasizes the need for both technological advancements and policy changes to meet the global challenge of climate change. So he enlists the help of technology and the change of government's policies to meet the challenges thrown by climate change. We can see that his approach is optimistic and adaptive too, and he argues that humanity has the tools and the resources needed to prevent the worst impacts of climate change if we act decisively. So his approach is different from many other philosophers and thinkers about climate change. Many of them do not agree that artificial intelligence can in any way help avert climate disaster, because it consumes vast amounts of water. So there are different views related to climate change impacts and the resolutions. So other than these books, there are some other interesting books and which have been acclaimed globally for being, for talking about climate change and talking about resolving climate change and being able to formulate public opinion and influence government policies. So, one of them is The Weather Makers by Tim Flannery. So, this book is an important book, and it talks about climate change and how it impacts the earth and what are the resolutions that can be suggested to avert climate disasters. This is yet another book on climate change and the science behind it. However, it is unique in the way that it handles the subject matter. It uses literary and idiomatic references to connote climate change. He borrows the term the Great Aerial Ocean from Alfred Russel Wallace to describe the atmosphere. So, he tries to use everyday terms to describe things related to the science of climate change, and he has a very unique presentation because he uses instances and examples of classical European texts or texts of English literature. And so, here we can see how using English literature makes the concern much more powerful, much more well expressed. It can be sort of accepted with a multiple layer of meanings. So, when he uses such vocabulary, when he uses poetic descriptions, he sort of makes use of a new kind of language, which is or which has not been used in climate non-fiction, because climate itself, climate studies are related to the world of science. So, the words use should be dry and cold and factual, but it does not do that. He uses words that are extremely interesting, rejuvenating, which may wake one up to the reality of climate change. There is a certain relevance of his language to the present day world. So, when he says the great aerial ocean, he wants the reader to picture the sky as, or the atmosphere as something moving, something living, that it is not a sheet of dead glass, it is not something that is vacant. So, he calls it the great aerial ocean, so that one may understand that there are waves, ripples, storms in the atmosphere that is hanging over our heads, and that atmosphere is personified through his description of calling it the great aerial ocean. In the chapter titled People in Greenhouses, there is a subtle use of imagery to represent the role of America behind global warming. So, there is a quote here: "The intergovernmental panels TAR and the oily axis of evil, bull dust baffles brains and consensus subverts science. White House washes from NASA to Harvard." So, one can see that what is coming to us from big organizations, from the White House, or coming from Harvard or NASA, he believes that it is all an eyewash. The reality of climate change is not correctly displayed to public. So, it is the essence of climate non-fiction to lay bare the facts in a way that will be understood by the readers, or who may not be scientists or who may not be acquainted with scientific processes. So, while looking at these books and the reviews on Amazon. I saw some reviews of such non-fiction books, people saying that we don't have any idea of science, but when we read this and this book, we got a very clear idea of what is happening in the atmosphere, what are the greenhouse gases, and what is their connection, and what is the meaning of carbon sink, and how does the carbon sink sort of absorb the extra CO2. So, all these things are shown in climate fiction writing, non-climate fiction writing. In the chapter titled The Gaseous Greenhouse, he comments in literary language on the source of rising levels of CO2. So, again he presents the cold facts, the hard facts, in a way that will be understood by somebody who does not understand pure science, or somebody who is a layman as far as science is concerned. So, there is the quote here: "It is our servants, the billions of engines that we have built to run on fossil fuels such as coal, petrol and oil based fuels and gas, and that play the leading role in manufacturing CO2. Most dangerous of all are the power plants that use coal to generate electricity. Black coal, anthracite, is composed of at least 92% carbon, while dry brown coal is around 72% carbon." So, we already have examples, but they are most of the time neglected. When people burn a coal fire in their house, in the room, and they shut the doors and go to sleep, so people have died in their sleep because of the poisoning. So, because of the high carbon content in the atmosphere. So, it is something that we see in our daily lives. Sitting too close to a coal angithi can have some very negative effects, and one can come out with a headache, or a sort of ill feeling, a feeling of being sick, if some hours are spent very close to the coal angithi or the coal chula. So, the reason here is because it is very high in carbon dioxide. So, the book has a lot of information about how climate change has impacted various species worldwide. The book also discusses the geological context of climate impact. It gives the history of international climate negotiations along with alternatives to fossil fuels. So, one can see that this climate non-fiction is a genre that is very strongly focused on bringing about change in the world, and it has to its benefit the support of various subjects and various disciplines. As mentioned earlier, it is interdisciplinary. So, we can see climate change from a psychoanalytical perspective, or we can see it through a political perspective, we can see it through a historical perspective. And so, the importance of non-fiction on climate change is this, that it can convey a lot to influence public policy and change government policies. Again, interestingly, his words are very figurative, very poetic, when he says that the great aerial ocean is a very interesting name, though the word atmosphere would be very boring So he gives this description of the great aerial ocean. Conjures in the mind's eye the currents, eddies, and layers that create the weather far above our heads, and which is all that stands between us and the vastness of space. So, this is from the book The Weather Makers. So, we can see that this book is outstanding as far as language is concerned, and its different take on climate change. So, there is another book here, Global Warming, Understanding the Forecast by David Archer. This book is more science based and good to understand what are the pure science facts in climate change, and to explain why it happens, what is the process behind the absorption of extra heat in the atmosphere. This book breaks down everything into small parts. So somebody who is not familiar with science might find some difficulty, but still reading it and trying to understand it does make sense and does equip one for some basic scientific background on what climate change is about. So, this book by David Archer, this is also another non-fiction book. It is a non-fiction book on climate that explains the scientific processes behind global warming. Such hard facts about climate form the basis of hard climate fiction, and so we know that climate fiction is hard and soft depending on the extent of the facts of science used in it. So books like these could well supply information for hard climate fiction. And there are certain terms that it uses off and on again, such as the term black bodies, which are crucial for the absorption of ultraviolet radiation from the sun. So though normally a balance would be maintained in the heat absorbed by Earth and sent back into space, the present age has disturbed that balance. So the carbon content in the atmosphere, which was naturally balanced in the sense that the ozone layer protected the Earth and its living creatures from ultraviolet radiation, and the heat that was coming from the sun, some of it went back into the atmosphere, and some of it was reflected and absorbed by the oceans or the forest. So the amount of heat that was sort of captured by these three greenhouse gases, it was balanced out. But today the balance is disturbed. The amount of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere has increased, and thus the Earth is getting heated up. The book mentions several climate models created by scientists to forecast future climate on the planet and the concentration of GHGs in the atmosphere. So it also tells us about the climate models created by scientists, in which they try to predict the future outcome of climate, and they try to make these models as realistic as possible. So two of these models are bare rock model and layer model. These models need to be as realistic as possible. It mentions the impacts of burning of fossil fuels and also gives a detailed scientific analysis of the composition of greenhouse gases and their compositions. So we can see that the book is concerned about the scientific details and the components of the greenhouse gases, and it is a book meant for students too, for it has questions and it has tests in it. Climate change is something that has been discussed in various platforms through various disciplines in non-climate fiction, and thus non-climate fiction is as important as climate fiction. While climate fiction can use fantasy to present facts or to give a message, non-climate fiction may not use fantasy, but yes, creativity is used. So when we looked at these books, we found the titles of these books were very creative and were very suggestive. So literature and climate change have a relationship. Literature is not ruled out even in non-climate fiction, because those books, they tend to convey reality to us, and they make use of language and literature and use of other languages too. So in many of these books, after one reads these books, one becomes very well informed about the facts of climate change, and all of them, they talk about creating a society that is just, that is equitable, that is sustainable, and it is like climate fiction. When we discuss it, non-climate fiction, when we discuss it in terms of stories and anecdotes, there we find that there is a personal touch. We find there is a personal touch, and which makes that writing very appealing. Climate non-fiction material can influence a lot of creative writing too. Those personal narratives and reflections can influence fiction and can influence poetry also. So it is a very important genre, and the books that I have mentioned, they all need to be read. I would like to discuss another writer who is talking about climate change. In fact, there are two other writers whom I intend to discuss in detail. One is Dipesh Chakrabarty. He belongs to the field of history, and yet he writes about climate change in his work, The Climate of History. And then there is Arne Naess, who writes about climate change, but with a very different perspective. He talks about deep ecology. So we can see that non-fiction in climate change also brings in numerous perspectives. So what is deep ecology? Deep ecology is related to that time that is before the recorded time, and deep ecology is a movement which sort of opposes the capitalist system. We'll stop here, and we'll continue in the next lesson and take up some of these writers in detail. Thank you.